Hey everyone, welcome back to the Astrology podcast. My name is Jessie James, and today we are going to talk all about the one and only Barbra Streisand, whose 1,000 page, 48-hour long memoir, My Name is Barbra, I just finished listening to. I have been listening to it for over a month. I moved September 1st, and the whole time I was packing up my old apartment in Pasadena and then moving to this apartment and unpacking in this apartment and putting together my desk and taking walks and living my life and driving places. I have been listening to this memoir nonstop. It's once again 48 hours long, and even on 1.5 speed, that's 36 hours long. But I finally finished it, and I have been saying when I finish this memoir, I am making an episode about Barbra Streisand because she's incredible. I loved her so deeply before I read her memoir, and I love her much more deeply after I read her memoir, because I'm like, oh, she is so similar to, me and so many other women who have ADHD and have been called divas their whole lifetimes just because they stand up for what they believe in and don't conform to societal norms and speak out and don't take men being like, oh, well, you shouldn't be a director because you're a woman. Like, they don't fit normal standard gender roles that are expected of women, which is a good thing because those aren't natural, they're patriarchal. So I'm super excited to talk about Barbra Streisand and her astrology. Her birth chart is one that looks a little bit unassuming on the surface. I do a lot of celebrity birth charts on this podcast that are giant aspect configurations across the whole thing, big X's, big kites, big triangles. Barbara's is pretty on one side of her chart. She has a second house stellium. Everything that she has is pretty much between Aries and Libra. But it's still a very interesting birth chart with a lot of strong aspects and a very clear, oh yes, this is Barbra Streisand. This is the birth chart of a very, very famous and pioneering and trailblazing woman. And I'm really excited to talk about that with you. Quick updates in general. The Taylor Swift album came out 1 week ago, The Life of a Showgirl. I have done YouTube videos talking about my thoughts as a galer on the album. I actually have a completely new set of thoughts in 1 week because I have listened to each of the songs more, and every time I listen to them, they get more and more queer. I think that she's a genius, but I also think that we are not nearly done yet. I think that this is just Act 1 and that there are more acts to come in this Showgirl era. I don't think that we've seen all the songs. I think that we are getting Female Rage the musical sometime soon, so I am keeping my eyes peeled. But that woman has had me staying up way too late this week. The Jimmy Fallon, the Seth Meyers, the Jimmy Fallon part 2. I live on the East Coast now. I am up till 1:30 a.m. watching an interview, praying, hoping that she'll announce something, but then she doesn't. But I still, have full notes app pages full of Easter eggs that I've clocked from each of these interviews. And then I'm awake at 1:30 a.m. for some Easter eggs, but at what cost? But it's been really fun. Honestly, that's been my whole life. I have just been thinking about Taylor Swift and thinking about astrology like I always do, and working and really enjoying the East Coast. I love the rain literally more than anything. God, the smell of the air before, during, and after the rain is so healing to me. After 7 years of living in LA with all of the dry and all of the dust, I am just I don't know, I really feel like I'm home, and I literally am home. I live with my parents again, but I also feel my soul, my Pisces rising soul, is so at home on the East Coast with the moisture and with the changing colors of the leaves and fall and crisp air, and I'm taking walks in my sweaters, and it's so nice. And it's still 90 degrees in LA, so I'm feeling a little bit yes, ha 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 right now, but I'm sure that will fade probably by February when it's still really, really freaking cold. So I'm enjoying it while it lasts, and just really want to get up into all of the fall activities. I really want to go apple picking. I want to go to Knox Farms and go to the hayride, and I want to do a corn maze, and Halloween is very exciting over here, and Gilmore Girls, and you can probably see I have a fall candle going back there, and just like baking cinnamon rolls, like Taylor Swift did with Carly Kloss recently, and all of the good time fall stuff. I'm so happy to have seasons again. I've just felt so disconnected from seasons and therefore from nature and the earth. So it really is like a very healing like return. Every hero's journey needs to leave home and then come back to home at some point to start the next hero's journey, and I'm really excited for what that is. But that said, I don't really have much more going on than the Taylor Swift album and being a little Christian Girl Autumn babe. So let's talk about Barbra Streisand. Barbra Streisand was born on April 24th, 1942 in Brooklyn, New York. That makes her a Taurus Sun, a Leo Moon, and an Aries rising. Her favorite number is also 24 or 42 because that is her birth date, and so she loves either of those numbers. She is super into numerology. She's very, very spiritual. She's just like such a cool, mystical person. And I definitely do recommend listening to or reading her memoir if you have a spare 48 hours. It's very long, but it never drags. Like, she has lived such a full and beautiful life. It is chock full of stories about her life. She was born in Brooklyn, and her mom, Diana, had always wanted to be a professional singer, but ended up becoming a school secretary at a high school where her dad, Emmanuel, was a high school teacher. And so that is where her parents met, and they got married, and they had Barbara. And then when Barbara was just over a year old, her father sadly passed away from complications from an epileptic seizure. And so she doesn't have any really conscious memory of her dad, and she has lived her whole life feeling like an outcast, like feeling like everyone else had a dad who came home at the end of the day, but she didn't. And she talks so much in her book about like her struggles with losing her dad and how that's impacted her throughout her life. It was a huge part of her development. And then there was also the fact that once her dad died, her family was plunged into basically poverty levels. Like, her mom was a very low paid bookkeeper and worked so much that she just couldn't give Barbara the attention that she needed, being a child who is developing attachment and conscious thought and everything. And her mother, one, has resented her forever because her mother wanted to be a singer, and Barbara went on to become a famous singer, and her mom sort of resented her for being able to live out her dream. And her mom just seems like not a great person, like maybe a narcissist. She, even much, much later in Barbara's career, was invited to Barbara's show in Vegas. And then before the show even started, her mom left and was just like, yeah, I just didn't really want to be here. I wanted to go shopping. It's clear that she's very much all about her. And then when things became all about Barbara, she was really not okay with them. So she had a tumultuous upbringing and a tumultuous relationship with both of her parents for very different reasons. Hey guys, this is Jessie editing in post. I am just now realizing I didn't mention that Barbara is Jewish. She is a very proud Jewish woman, and her Jewish heritage is extremely important to her, so I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. And Barbara started singing when she was really young, but her main goal was always to become an actress, and she went to Erasmus Hall High School in Brooklyn, and she sang in chorus with Neil Diamond, but she finally got her first big break, her first real job, working at the Bonsoir nightclub in September 1960, and she was paid $125 a week. And she had taken odd jobs before this. She had she came from a poor family. She needed to work. She needed to make money. But she was so new to this scene, and obviously literally all I talk about, the music and entertainment industry is full of such predatory and exploitative people that she really had to rely on the kindness and the honesty of other people for a while when she was starting out her career, because she just had no idea what the processes were and how to get a different manager if her existing manager was cheaping her out, etc. And so I think that she really blazed a trail for women in the arts, standing up for herself, not taking no for an answer, not letting men treat her poorly, not letting herself be exploited because she knew what it was like to be exploited, because people try to do that when you are a young girl who hasn't really been in the industry and has a lot of naivete. She was like, you mess with the wrong woman, because she's an Aries rising and a Taurus sun and a Leo moon. Like, there's a lot of fire and stubbornness and like, I'm doing it my way in her. And she's also just a real visionary and a real trailblazer for women and for artists, and the icon that she is. So looking at Barbra's birth chart, as I said, she's a Taurus sun, a Leo moon, and an Aries rising, and her Taurus sun is in her second house. And she has a second house stellium. She is not just her sun here in her second house Taurus, but also her Mercury, her Saturn, and her Uranus. So the second house of Taurus is a very important place in her chart. She has 4 planets here. It's a very powerful place for her. And when I'm looking at a sign and a house that is very important in someone's birth chart, especially with a stellium like this, one of the first things you want to look at is what planet is this sign ruled by? And the sign of Taurus is ruled by the planet Venus. So then you want to say, okay, where is Venus in this birth chart and what is its condition? So Venus in Barbra Streisand's birth chart is in her 12th house of Pisces. Venus in Pisces is exalted. So her second house of Taurus is ruled by this exalted Venus, this like Venus in the best possible place it can be in the birth chart, doing incredible. Like, this is a great planet in a great placement to have ruling like the most prominent house and sign in her chart. And it's Venus, so it gives her a lot of sweetness to all of these things. And the second house talks about, in capitalism, we assign it a lot of meaning related to like money, but it's also related to your self-value. It's related to what you do to make money. Like, what talents do you have? What do you have that people want to pay you for? How do you get that money? So she has a lot of focus in her lifetime, especially with her sun, her ego, her life compass being here, on developing self-worth and deepening her self-worth, getting enough money and material possessions to be able to transcend just like survival mode like she was when she was much younger, and start to understand, what does this money and material possessions even mean to me? Like, what does that matter versus like experiences and versus relationships? Like, she can have a really nuanced relationship with the second house because she's been able to get out of survival mode and like really get in touch with herself and her self-worth. And this has really played out in Barbra's life. She has so much value and appreciation for arts, physical art, as well as like music and theater, etc. And she loves design. She has multiple houses, being a celebrity. She has always been like a very passionate collector of arts. In her memoir, she all the time was like, oh, I really regret selling that painting, or like, I bought this painting and I just loved it. Like, it's very clear that she has a very innate and intuitive sense of aesthetics that really rule her life and like all of the decisions that she makes, which is so Taurus of her. So Taurus of her. But one of her houses she decorated in a full like Art Deco style. She calls it the Art Deco house. Like, design and art is such a huge part of her life, which is very Venusian and very Taurian. Taurus is also very closely associated with stubbornness. Honestly, all fixed signs should be, but Taurus, I think, really gets that stereotype with the bull, and she is stubborn. Like, Barbra Streisand is a stubborn person, not so much in the way of like, not wanting to budge and not being open-minded, but so much more so like when she wants to do something, she's not going to let anyone tell her that she shouldn't do it. And good for her, because a lot of the time people were telling her not to do things because she was a woman. They were like, oh, you can't act in and direct this movie because like, why don't you just let a man direct it? This is not a woman's place. And of course that just makes her double down more and be like, no, I'm directing the movie. But like, why? She should have been able to just do that anyway. Like, why do people have to question women when we want to do things? But this also indicates someone who is very deeply practical, someone who has a very strong understanding of the way that their values and the things that they value guide their actions and their behaviors in this world, which is an earth sign sort of thing. Taurus is an earth sign in one of the natural earth houses, the second house. And Barbra really embodies this. Like, she has really stood up for what she believes in her whole life. Her values and the things that she cares about really do guide her actions, especially as she has gotten more successful and like doesn't have to like fight to prove herself anymore, she has focused a lot more on philanthropy and on using her passion for social justice and women's rights to create actual legislation and actual movement and actual foundations in service of the things that she loves and cares about and wants to do. So she is giving like the most second house Taurus Sun imaginable, and we love that for her. Thank you, Barbara, for all that you've given the world. And her Sun makes one aspect in her birth chart. It makes a square, an exact square to her Pluto in Leo in the 5th house. A Pluto in Leo is a very common placement among the baby boomers. And Leo being her 5th house gives her a Pluto in the 5th house of creative expression and romance and hobbies and entrepreneurship and children. And when you have Pluto in the 5th house, this indicates that you are called on this like lifelong story of transformation through and within the realms of creativity and self-expression. Having Pluto here in the 5th house means that when you are creating, and you have to create, that's the one thing you are called to create throughout your lifetime, but when you're creating, you have to stay so true to yourself. Like if you try to repress part of yourself in your art, or if you try to pretend to be someone that you're not, or you try to create things that don't really come from your heart just for the sake of creating, you're going to crash and burn. Like when you are creating and you have Pluto in the 5th house, you need to transform through your art. You need to put your heart and soul and all that you are into your work, and then let that guide you on this journey of self-transformation and inner growth and inner healing, and just like using that as a catalyst to transform the world. Barbara has received tons of pushback and criticism on her work. She has been told she's too old to play certain roles. She's been told that she's too young to play certain roles. When she wrote the movie Yentl, she was told like, a woman shouldn't be doing this, and like, why is a woman doing that, and like, why are you filming here, and why are you making this creative choice? And she was just like, let me make my movie. And the movie is phenomenal. The movie is a massive hit. It's a timeless classic. And, you know, it wouldn't have been this successful, I don't think, if she had let other people's criticism get to her and make her change the way that she expressed herself. Because with this Pluto in the 5th house, her staying true to herself and to her original vision is really one of the things that lets her be so successful. Because as long as she stays true to herself, she is on a path to success and to transformation for herself and for the world. But if she had made any attempt to like sell her soul for money and fame and like sacrifice her personal values for the sake of like making a lot of money, that would not have gone well for her. The shadow side of a 5th house Pluto is that like everyone and their mother is going to try to exploit you and manipulate you, especially in an industry like Hollywood. These are people who naturally draw like bad actors to them, who are going to try to use their talents for their own financial gain. And this has definitely happened to Barbara throughout her life. As I mentioned, like when she was starting out, she had no idea what was going on, and she had people who were trying to underpay her and people who didn't have the best projects in mind for her because they underestimated her, and she had to figure out how to make her own way and be successful in the entertainment industry. It's very important, if you have a 5th house Pluto, to read all contracts so carefully before you sign them. Like, make sure that you have the correct credit for your work, you're getting the correct payment for your work. And Barbara talks about how when she was younger, she didn't really care as much about credits for her work. She cared about the art, and she was like, well, if someone takes a credit for that, like, I don't really care. And then looking back as an adult, she was like, how foolish of me. I should have claimed credit on that thing because I did it. So I should have gotten the credit. And because I didn't have that credit, I didn't get the royalties, or I didn't get as many royalties as I should have. And so she advocates very strongly for all women to understand exactly what they're signing and to take their credits. She talks a lot about how women are pressured to like, you know, not care about like the who gets the money and whatever, and we'd have to play cool and just be like, yeah, no, I just love the art. But like, no, love the money too. Love the credit too, because if you're not taking it, someone else is, and that someone is probably a man who didn't make the art in the first place, and he doesn't deserve that. And finally, if you have a 5th house Pluto, like, keep yourself safe. If you put yourself in a position to be manipulated by other people, they are going to come to you and they're going to do it. It's so important to have really good boundaries and a really good understanding of what's going on and, people around you that you really trust. So having her sun in Taurus squaring her Pluto in Leo means that there is a tension here. Taurus is fixed earth, Leo is fixed fire. So these two things, they're fixed as well. So they're very stubborn and they don't really meld well together. And so when you have a challenging aspect like a square in this instance or an opposition, you have trouble integrating these two parts of your personality. And when that's Pluto, the darkest, farthest planet from the sun, and the sun, the brightest light in the sky, you have trouble shining the light of your sun onto the dark depths of Pluto, transformation, everything that's like under the surface in you, your shadow side. The sun is touching Pluto in this square aspect, so it still has a lot of vitality. It's just harder for you to access and hard for you to integrate into your life and into your personality. And Pluto and the sun, despite their differences in brightness, they do have similar tendencies like ambition, force, power, domination, aggression, and extremism in different ways between the two planets. But those things are activated because they're touching on both the Plutonian side and on the solar side. So now you have these like really big, like aggressive, personality traits really coming to the surface, but they're locked in this little battle between like light and dark, and light is not good, but light is like ego and visibility, and dark is shadow and subconscious. And so you have to figure out throughout your life how you can work with both of these energies and integrate them both into your personality so you don't have like a massive blind spot one way or the other. And because this tension between these two strong planets can get so tough, it's sort of like, things bubble up and they're like boiling and the lid's still on tight. There are going to be times in these people's life where they just need to let that lid pop off and let out that steam. And only once they're able to like let it all go. They didn't have rage rooms back in like the 1960s, but now a rage room would be a wonderful way to let off steam. That will be the thing that allows them to have inner transformation and to finally integrate these things together, and therefore to live a life that is not like treacherous, like at all times. And they also really need, and this is really hard with the fixed signs, but they really need to learn the lessons of compromise, cooperation, and inner moderation to achieve a balance between their innate tendencies to dominate and, the less innate but very necessary skill of being receptive to others. Her other luminary, her moon, is in her 5th house of Leo as well. And a Leo moon, I love. A Leo moon with a creative outlet. A Leo moon without a creative outlet, I do not love. But Barbra Streisand obviously has creative outlets up the wazoo. So this is someone who, I love her Leo moon. I love it very much. And in the 5th house, which is the natural house of Leo, very self-expressive, very creative. And with the moon here, which is like your emotions, your soul, and where you come from, it's just a really, really strong and passionate mix of emotions and creativity with an amazing ability for creative self-expression. These people express their love and their romance in dating with passion and drama. And they really want, this is so key for them, they really want validation for their work. They want attention, they want recognition, and they want praise. But a Leo will never ask for that. They will never go to you and be like, hey, come look at my thing. Come look at my thing that I did. Don't you like it? That's much more like Libra energy, honestly. A Leo is just going to make stuff and put it out into the world, and then you will pay attention to them because the stuff they make is so good. Where they have a problem is if they're making stuff and people aren't paying attention to it and aren't validating them, they can work themselves into a real tizzy. These people are thus naturally drawn to careers in drama and music and in the arts. But because they have such a strong desire for validation, like they might have trouble balancing that desire for praise with the ability to stay humble. And that's something that Barbra has received some criticism for, like all divas do. But like, hello, a beautiful artist deserves to be validated. Why does she need to be humble? Come on. On my Misandrist podcast, you're never going to catch me saying a woman should be more humble. And the 5th house is the house of children. So they are drawn to children and they bond easily with them. Barbra is super, super close with her son, Jason, and seems to just like really love children. So this all checks out. And touching her moon is her fifth house Leo Chiron, which is so interesting because it adds this element of woundedness into Barbra's life trajectory and her passion for creating art. And obviously, with her issues with her parents, woundedness has been a central theme of her life, like so fundamental to who she is. And it makes sense that this was one of the driving forces that inspired her to become a famous actress and singer and director and writer and philanthropist and. Chiron in Leo in the fifth house indicates a deep need for self-discovery, creativity, and love, but they face hurdles in showing their real selves. They can feel like they don't deserve the attention or the praise that they crave and that they need very deeply, which can block their creativity if they're like, oh, I'm making this work because like I really want praise for it, but then they're like, but I don't deserve praise, like I'm not good enough for that, then that will stifle them from being able to create like they want to. And one way to heal this wound is to learn to recognize their own value. And fortunately for Barbra Streisand, her sun is in her second house of Taurus. So this is really her life journey. Her life compass is pointing her on a journey of understanding her own value and what she has to offer the world. And that in turn helps her heal her Chiron wound. Something so important for a fifth house Chiron is to be able to find joy in creativity, to express themselves freely, and to use their creativity to turn their old wounds and alchemize and transmute them into their strengths and their wisdom and lessons to teach other people, Chiron being the wounded healer. And where these people can go wrong is if they look too much to other people for validation of what they're doing, because one, like you need to be able to find validation within yourself in order to be successful. You cannot rely on what other people think about you because other people's minds are fickle. They don't really understand you as well as you understand yourself, and you will always be able to find voices in the crowd who are dissenting. So it's really important that all of your validation can come from yourself, and then, happy voices in the crowd are just a bonus. And it's just really important because the fifth house is the house of children, to discover that inner child and that childlike joy and wonder, and that where we were as children when we really didn't care what other people thought about us. We were just exploring the world and learning about things and creating and existing. And that is a really important feeling for anyone who has Chiron in the fifth house to have. And Barbra's moon conjunct her Chiron in her fifth house of Leo indicates, moon is where you come from and Chiron is your wound. So really like a wound from where she came from, which makes a lot of sense for someone who has really deep attachment wounds and grief and loss from her childhood, losing her father, and then also being in poverty and not getting the attention that she needed from her mom, and not having a mom who cared about her as much as any parent, especially a single parent, should. But the journey to heal this wound from where she came from leads to significant transformation and growth, especially in the fifth house, where you are healing that wound through creativity and creative self-expression and art. Especially the moon is the mother, and so this indicates a very strong wound related to the mother. And yes, astrology is real. Both of these things, the moon and Chiron, make a trine to Barbra's rising in Aries. Barbra having her moon trine her rising, especially in two very warm, very expressive fire signs, means that she has a very warm, imaginative, and caring personality in general. She's deeply attuned to her feelings and can easily express the core of her emotional being. Your rising obviously is how you come off to the world, and so having the moon in a very supportive aspect, a trine with that, lets your emotions from the moon come to the surface the way you present to the world, your rising sign. The moon is also very sensitive and changeable. It moves around the whole zodiac in 28 and a half days. It's the fastest moving planetary body. And so the moon is very sensitive and very intuitive. And having this in a supportive trine with her rising means that she as a person is very sensitive, very intuitive, to the point probably of feeling like very psychic. She has a very strong connection to the universe. She talked a lot about in her book, where she says, at the moment of commitment, the universe conspires to help you achieve what you want. And she has always gone by that rule. She's like, the moment that I said, I want to become a singer, like things in the universe started shifting around to make that work for me. She's the queen of manifestation. And I think it has a lot to do with two of her big three, her moon and her rising, being in this very supportive trine aspect. So even with her very stubborn, fixed Leo moon, she can still be like a chameleon and fit into any environment. And also gives her very deep insights into other people's behavior and why they're acting the way that they do, and things that they might not be expressing to you with their words, but they are showing with their body language or their energy or their eye contact or any number of things. And she can use this ability to easily intuit, what other people want from her. And this makes her a very popular person. Like Barbra Streisand, everyone loves. Everybody loves Barbra. She met Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, and like they put her on like a yes list. Like anything Barbra says, say yes, because we will end up doing it eventually. She became immediately very good friends with Bill Clinton's mom, Virginia. Everyone she meets, she can befriend. Like she is just such a warm, bright light of a person, of a human being. And a lot of that has to do with having her moon trine her rising in fire signs. However, this can also lead her, because she really wears her heart on her sleeve with this aspect, to take things too personally, which can stifle her creativity, and it can lead to a lot of like what I would call oppositional defiance disorder, which is a neurodivergent trait, and Barbra definitely has ADHD. I don't know if she had the word for it most of her life, but it's certainly what she had. And so a lot of the time, like people would ask her to do something and she'd be like, well, I don't want to do that because they're asking me to do it. Relatable, but also can cause a lot of problems, especially in an industry where feedback is very important, because often you can't do the work and create the art that you want to create without funding from other people. And to get funding from other people, you usually need to make some sort of compromise. And the last thing I'll say about this aspect is that if you have a moon trine or sextile or insupportive aspect to your rising, your social life is so important in your life journey and your personal development. You will attract a wide circle of friends, and these people are going to be fundamentally important for getting you into the roles you need to be in for your journey in life. And this is also someone who is naturally drawn to like volunteering and philanthropy and work that really makes a difference. Like they need to have a sense of purpose that transcends themselves and that helps society at large. Because her moon is conjunct her Chiron, she also has her Chiron in Leo trine her rising in Aries. And Chiron trine rising is someone who has a superpower of embracing their own vulnerability and allowing their own wounds and the way they communicate about them and share them and use them to help other people to be a source of strength and connection in their relationships. They have a unique ability to integrate that Chiron woundedness through this supportive trine aspect to their rising, how they present to the world. They are so well integrated into who they are as a person that it's not like, oh my gosh, you're asking me to talk about my trauma? Like you're asking me to be vulnerable? Like I could never do that. That's not them. They are very easily able to talk about these things, and it becomes one of their greatest strengths and their greatest points where they can connect with other people, because a lot of people are not used to vulnerability when they first meet someone, and it can open doors to really strong connections and to growth for the person themselves, Barbra Streisand, but also for everyone they come into contact with. And them wearing their wounds like on their person doesn't mean they let their pain define them. They turn that past trauma into strength and wisdom, and that strength and wisdom defines them. But the trauma itself is not definitional for them. They're not like, oh my gosh, my trauma, my trauma, my trauma. They're like, my strength. My strength, my strength. And because they have such a strong relationship with their own trauma and wounds and pain, they are very compassionate and empathetic, and they love to hear about other people's trauma and wounds and pain because they can so deeply relate. They're also really inspirational to other people who are on their own healing journey because they're able to create such a safe space for other people to open up and share their own stories. And so anyone who has their rising trine their Chiron, like one of the things that you should consider in this life is how can you use your own trauma and what you've learned from it to help other people process their own trauma and to create a safe space and to practice active listening and to really let people use you in the way that you have healed as inspiration for their own healing journey. And Barbra's Chiron in Leo in her 5th house also makes an exact square to her Mercury in her 2nd house, Taurus. A second house Taurus Mercury takes those themes that we talked about with the second house Taurus Sun and applies them to mercurial areas of life, like the intellect and the way that you communicate and the way that your brain works. And so this is someone who is super practical in the way they communicate. They're very good with money. They're very good at talking about money and self-worth and talents and what they bring to the table. They understand the long term. They are not just interested in short-term gratification. They understand long-term goals and long-term investments and just thinking and planning for the long term in general. Barbra Streisand, for example, there was a house that she wanted to buy and she didn't buy it. And then this other couple bought it. And then they made all of these renovations to the house that Barbra was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I would have done. But then when she went to try to buy it from them, they had like tripled the price. And so she was like, no, this house isn't worth buying at this price. And, you know, if it's meant for me, it will come to me. And then I think like a decade later, it opened up at a much lower price and she was finally able to buy it. So like she understands not making impulsive decisions. What is meant for me will find me, that like manifestation and connection with the universe that she has, but also just like she wasn't willing to pay that amount of money for that specific house. And some celebrities, especially with like tons of money, would be like, oh, whatever it costs, you know, no number is too high. But that's not a second house Taurus Sun and Mercury. They are very practical. They know exactly what they're willing to spend on what things, and they stick to their budget. And having Mercury square Chiron makes a lot of sense for someone who communicates professionally, but is also interesting because it indicates that there was a challenge here for her. These people tend to have a hard time conveying their emotions and their thoughts in words. Like they can really have strong feelings and strong emotions and know how they're feeling, but like really be unable to figure out exactly how to say that in words. And Barbra, as an artist and as a writer and as a director, you know, she can convey these things without words specifically. She can convey them in intonation, in the way that she sings, in the way that she speaks. She can convey them through stage direction and cinematography cues and pacing. So she has found ways around this like inability to put her exact feelings into words, which is definitely part of this Mercury Chiron square. Like, I don't know if she would have been able to do that in the way that she has if she didn't have her Mercury and Chiron in a square and have to figure out a way around this tension. And this can also cause trouble learning in standard formal settings like high school and college. And these people might need to find a way around that, like learning in different ways. But they are lifelong learners. And so part of their problem with school and like formal education might be that it seems so like rote. Like you go to school and then you stop and then you do job. They're like, no, I want to learn my whole life. I need a different way to learn so that I can learn my whole life and not just in school. I mentioned that Barbra has her Venus in Pisces in her 12th house. And exalted Venus, if you don't know what exaltation is, it's like the best place that a planet can be. They're like the guest of honor in Pisces Palace. Venus has her own throne room up at the very top. She has a balcony. She has her own private hot tub. She has the best spot in the house and she is living large up there. And that's what having an exalted Venus is like. And because it's in mystical, magical Pisces, every time I say that, I think of Benson Boone, and like he's honestly ruined my life, that little Mormon. But it's fine, and I'm gonna get through it, and maybe one day he'll stop being a Mormon, and I can feel less bad about it. But all that is to say that Venus in Pisces, you know, wants love beyond the ordinary. They want love that transcends. They want love that is spiritual and mystical and beauty and art and romance and all of the other things associated with Venus that are also spiritual and magical and transcendental. Poetic. What is Barbra Streisand if not poetic? And I talked about Venus in the 12th house in the SZA episode, but to recap, the 12th house is the house that is right above the horizon at the moment that you're born, so where the sun is rising. And when the sun is rising, its rays and its brightness really obscure all the things that are there. So the 12th house is really obscured. It's a place of solitude. It's behind the scenes life. It's introspection. It's the subconscious. In tactical terms, it's hospitals and prisons and asylums. It's a place where things aren't really shown on the surface. Having Venus in the 12th house, you don't express Venus qualities like on your person. It's not a visible part of you. However, it's a very innate part of you because it's your subconscious. It's part of everything you do, but people can't really put their finger on it. And I see Venus in the 12th house as a very common placement for celebrities. I think for this exact reason, it gives them a little bit of like mystery and a little bit of like, I don't know what it is about her, but she's very charismatic. And these are people who are drawn to like a love that feels very mystical and very spiritual, people who tend to have relationships that are kept out of the public eye, and people who are very compassionate and altruistic in love. The shadow side of this is that these people can tend to be sacrificial in love. They can tend to put their partners before themselves to a degree that is very detrimental to themselves in their own lives. They can also have a fear of vulnerability, which is probably mitigated quite a bit by having her moon trine her rising. All of these placements and aspects you have to view in the larger context of the birth chart. So for someone else, I might say a fear of vulnerability. For Barbra Streisand, I wouldn't say that has a huge role to play in her life. But these people also, and this is a huge one with the 12th house, escapism and idealization. They have a tendency to wear rose-colored glasses around their partners and, ignore their flaws, ignore their red flags, and critically see a version of their partner that is someone that they want their partner to be instead of their actual partner, which can cause some disillusionment to them when they finally come down from this fantasy and realize that the reality of their relationship is not what they wanted, but can also be incredibly frustrating to their partner, who is just like, I want you to see me. And she's like, no, I see this perfect person of my dreams. And that can cause a lot of problems. And Barbra has been in a lot of different relationships. She was married quite young and she had her son Jason, and then she got divorced, and she has had relationships with many men throughout her life. And now she's married to James Brolin, the father of Josh Brolin, aka Thanos. And, they have a wonderful relationship, but she's definitely had lots of trials and tribulations throughout her life. And a lot of that can be ascribed to men not liking a strong, opinionated woman. But I'm very happy that she is happy with James. And I've also been working on this project where I'm analyzing like wedding charts and synastry charts of real couples versus lavender couples and seeing if I can try to figure out the difference between them without knowing anything about the backstory. And Barbra is one of the people in the entertainment industry who I can confidently say is heterosexual. Like, she is fully on board with people being gay, and she is like, I am a heterosexual woman. And so I'm like, okay, this is a perfect data point for me. This is like, it's so hard to figure out which relationships and which marriages in Hollywood are real. And I'm like, this has got to be like my blueprint. Like, this is what a real marriage looks like. So I'm excited to move forward with this project, and thank you, Barbra, for supplying my data. I love you, queen. Her Venus in Pisces makes a square to her third house Jupiter-Lilith conjunction in the sign of Gemini. Having Jupiter in Gemini indicates that Barbra has this like relentless thirst for knowledge. I will circle back to me saying that she has ADHD and be like, this is a placement that indicates that you have ADHD. Honestly, Jupiter in any of the mutable signs, Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces, placements in any of the mutable signs, Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces, indicate ADHD. I've got a mutable big three, all mutable. Virgo, Gemini, Pisces. I've got ADHD up the wazoo. More ADHD than anyone has ever known in their life. And autism. We're working with a full house over here. So yes, if you have Jupiter in Gemini and you have ADHD, you are not alone. Every other person with Jupiter in Gemini probably also has ADHD, because it indicates a relentless thirst for knowledge, and people with ADHD have a relentless thirst for knowledge a lot of the time, because we are like, I want to learn about this topic. Oh my gosh, wait, what about this topic? But what about this third thing? And then the dishes never get done. These are people who are natural learners, very fast learners. They're endlessly curious. They're drawn to a wide variety of subjects. They thrive on intellectual stimulation and social engagement and constant movement. Very restless placement. And Jupiter in the third house has some similar significations. It indicates someone who's very open-minded and who wants to understand how things work. And by things, I mean everything. Everything in the world. They are like, how does that work? They are naturally curious. They are wonderful conversationalists. Gemini placements in general tend to be people who can have really great conversations. Always invite a Gemini to your dinner party. I've said this before, I'll say it again. And I could be that Gemini if you're cool. And being Jupiter, who loves wisdom and loves journeys, these people have a very natural interest in foreign cultures and foreign lands, and they probably can learn languages pretty easily. Jupiter is actually a detriment in the sign of Gemini because it rules the opposite sign of Sagittarius. And this is honestly exactly why, because Jupiter is so expansive and it wants to learn everything, but Gemini is so detail oriented that they just get bogged down in the details of one thing, and then suddenly they're on the next thing, and then suddenly they're on the next, and like it can be really hard to integrate all of that knowledge into wisdom, instead of just having like scattered, like being really valuable at trivia, for example. The challenge here is to be able to, carve a path for yourself and have like interests and understand how they work together and how they can all combine to create the person that you want to be, instead of just watching 1 bajillion documentaries about 1 bajillion topics and never integrating those into your personality. Having Lilith in Gemini is really cool. It's like the embodiment of the trickster archetype. I've been doing so much work and learning about the trickster archetype. I just read the book The Other Within by Daniel Deerdorf. If you're a Taylor Swift fan or a fan of archetypal mythology and like Carl Jung, you will love this book. It's so freaking good. And they talked a lot about the trickster archetype, the mythological coyote, for example, the fool in tarot. And the magic of the trickster is that life over and over again creates structures. As human beings, we naturally want to put things in boxes, we want to label things, we want to make it easier for our brains to process them. The trickster doesn't like the box. The trickster breaks down the natural conventional wisdom and social norms and helps guide people into a way that things can be done that's more equitable and fair and efficient and less exclusionary to the point of pain. Obviously, things in the US are literally terrible right now, but like the US trying to deport immigrants, like barring the fact that they're doing a literal horrible job and just deporting like anyone who looks relatively not white, which is ridiculous and so unfair, and like will ruin my life if I continue to talk about it. Like, those are the people who grow our food. Those are the people who work these lower wage jobs, because if they're an undocumented immigrant, then they don't have the access to like go to OSHA and be like, hey, there's really unethical practices at my place of employment. They're not paying us minimum wage, etc. They have to accept whatever their employer gives them. So when their employer gives them very low pay so that they can charge very low prices for the goods that they make, those people can't complain. And so if you deport all of those workers, then suddenly you can't pay people these incredibly low wages anymore. You have to pay them at least minimum wage, and then the prices of goods goes up. Like, I don't know how anyone thought that electing this guy was going to decrease the price of groceries, because if you can do 1 + 1 = 2, then you can do deportations plus immigrants do a lot of our like low paid work equals prices going up. So that's an example of like the conventional path that the trickster seeks to, escape from, because the trickster can see that the way things are being done, the way that people are allowing their own bigotry to impact their actions and their systems and the way they do things, is making everything worse. And they're like, well, stop doing that. Duh. That's the trickster, and that is a Gemini Lilith. Someone who challenges conventional wisdom and embraces the unexplored realms of the mind, the subconscious. They have a keen intellect, a gift for communication, an ability to express themselves with clarity and charm, and their mind is a whirlwind of constant activity. There's that mutable Gemini again, always seeking new information. But especially with Lilith, which is like the primal feminine, it's very much like the shadow side of ourselves. They want secret communication. They want clandestine phone calls. They want to know things. They seek truth. They want to know things that aren't on the surface. They want to know things that no one else knows. But once again, Gemini, they have a hard time sticking to one path, one realm of knowledge. They're a little bit too ADHD. etc., etc. The blessing and the curse, especially under capitalism, and like if you have autism and ADHD, you have to remember there's actually nothing wrong with you. Your brain just works differently, and this society, this white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist society, was designed by and for neurotypical people. And so it's hard for us to exist in these structures. Like that's why I had to leave the corporate world. That's why I had a lot of trouble at jobs. That's why I like never got promoted despite being a very intelligent and hardworking person. I just don't really fit into these structures, and that's okay. And that is such a big part of learning to love yourself and accept yourself, is saying like it's okay that I don't fit into these structures that weren't created for me. It would be a little crazier if I did fit into them, because that would mean I wasn't really being myself. So yeah, this is my love letter to neurodivergent people. We rock. But anyway, this aspect that Barbra Streisand has of her Jupiter conjunct her Lilith has a signature where Jupiter's expansive energies illuminate Lilith's mysterious depths, transforming Lilith's darkness into conscious awareness that transmutes into wisdom. Jupiter. These are people who feel an irresistible pull to explore uncharted areas of life and taboos. I should also say that Barbra, as an Aries rising, has Mars as her chart ruler, and in her chart, Mars rules her first house of Aries, but it also rules her 8th house of Scorpio, and she has no placements in Scorpio, but it's still such an important part of her life because her chart ruler rules it. This is another thing where it's like, even if you don't have a placement in a certain sign, doesn't mean that sign's not in your birth chart. It's there, and sometimes it's really prominent, like her 8th house, and the 8th house is also dealing with like these taboos and what's below the surface and what cannot be seen. The modern ruler of Scorpio is Pluto, and Pluto is all about that deep, dark depths and transformation and rebirth and death, etc. And that is to say that with such a prominent 8th house, Barbra also naturally has this pull to understand taboos and seek out things that are hidden and most people don't want to look at, uncharted territories. This is someone who has a fearless, risk-taking spirit that makes them embrace life's adventures and disregard potential consequences in favor of the lessons that they have to learn. And so this can obviously be an intense experience, especially if you are leaning into this fearlessness and risk-taking. So if you have this placement in your chart and especially if you choose to follow this path, it's very important to have a very strong self-care and self-love practice, and also to be very good at setting strong boundaries, which you will need. And you will also need to have a very strong sense of perspective, because you're going to need to take a step back pretty regularly and see if the road that you're traversing down, because you're going down into darkness, you need to be like, hey, is this the right road? Is this fruitful? Will this benefit me? Is this dangerous? And make sure that you don't self-sabotage and that you can reroute when you need to. And so since Venus squares both of these planets, we have Venus squared Jupiter, which can be honestly a pretty hedonistic aspect. It's someone who can definitely overindulge, someone who can drink too much or smoke too much or eat too much or party too much. Like any sort of too much is what happens when you have both of the benefics, the greater benefic Jupiter and the lesser benefic Venus, touching each other. You can also have this restless spirit that propels you into new adventures before you've had time to integrate and process the emotions from the last adventure. And if you do this too many times in a row, you start to get really scattered and frazzled, and you have feelings and you're not sure where they came from and you've never integrated them. This is someone who really needs to keep a journal, and you need to work on processing your emotions from one experience and then going into the next experience, which is extra hard with these mutable signs, but you gotta do it. And the benefics, they have a very positive name. The malefics have a very scary name, but it doesn't mean that everything they do is good. And for example, if Venus squared Jupiter can have the problem of being a very fair weather friend, and they can get resentful if they do something for someone and then they don't have that reciprocated. And so these people need to work on just being altruistic and doing things for people without expecting anything in return. And this Venus square Lilith is a tension between Lilith, which is the primal feminine, the shadow side, and Venus, which is like the love and light feminine, like the art and beauty and relationships and romance. So it's like, do I show this like really love and light version of myself, or do I dig really deep down into my primal dark feminine side? And someone with this aspect might grapple with the idea that all people care about them for and all people value them for is their sensuality and the love and beauty and pleasure that they can offer to that person, instead of people caring about them as a human being. But at the same time, they might project this image into the world. They might feel this way about themselves, and then they project that feeling, and then other people just grasp onto it because it's been put out there for them. And so they really need to understand, you know, their own self-worth and their own self-value and what they can offer to the world, and how to do that in a way that doesn't feel like they're selling out any part of themselves, or not in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable about how much they're giving. If they feel uncomfortable about that, they need to take a step back and like reassess. This is a shadow work placement. Like any strong Lilith placement is a shadow work placement, but this is a shadow work placement. Because if you have any shame around your kinks or your intimacy or your erotic life, those are going to show up very strongly, especially with Venus being the ruler of her sun. So shadow work. So read Carl Jung, which I think everyone should do, but especially Barbra Streisand. And getting close to the end, the last big planet I want to talk about is her third house Gemini Mars, the other planet she has in her third house Gemini, and also her chart ruler. Mars is the planet of like action and drive and what you do in your lifetime, but also like aggression and fighting and war. And Gemini is all about words and the intellect. It's ruled by Mercury, the planet of like intellect and communication. So a Gemini Mars is someone who is great at debating. They are so good at words and communication, and any fight that they're having, they will probably try to turn it into a fight about the way the fight is being fought so that they can gain the upper hand through semantics and through debate tricks and through words. And Mars in the third house is someone who expresses themselves in a very assertive way, not someone who is diplomatic, someone who tends to be like brutally honest and often speaks without thinking. And Barbara talks about in her memoir how this has gotten her into a lot of trouble. Many people have had to have talks with her about the ability to be honest and candid while also being compassionate and nice and not telling people things that will upset them that they don't need to know. Certainly something that she struggles with, and very in line with having a third house Gemini Mars. This can also be someone who feels attacked just when someone has and expresses a different point of view than they do, though in mutable Gemini, this isn't as strong because Geminis are able to encompass a bajillion thoughts inside their brain. But they also just like really passionately fight for what they believe in. And Barbara is so passionate about her causes, her philanthropy, women's rights, social justice, heart disease, especially in women, etc. And so she definitely has used this placement for good in her lifetime, which we love to see. And then the final thing I'll talk about in Barbara's chart is that her Mars, her chart ruler in her third house of Gemini, makes a square to her Neptune in her sixth house of Virgo. And I've talked about sixth house Neptune before, I believe in my Angela Davis episode, but the sixth house is about the work you do every day, including the work you do for your job, but also including like chores and health and wellness and paying the bills and self-care, etc. And the sixth house is actually opposite the 12th house, where Neptune is the modern ruler of the sign of Pisces. And so Neptune in the sixth house is in a little bit of a detriment of its own, even though that's not so much a term used with the modern planets. Like these people can have a lot of trouble doing mundane things like chores because they just feel so burdensome and so taxing and so boring. And something that Barbara said multiple times in her memoir is that when she was young, she was like, I need to become famous so I can have someone to make my bed for me, because she just hated making her bed, probably still hates making her bed. And that is so sixth house Neptune. And people with this placement also tend to have a pretty convoluted relationship with health and wellness in their body. They have a tendency to move towards like more new age, like alternative medicine practices, and they tend to have a pretty strong mind-body connection and understanding of the mind-body connection, and like tend towards doing yoga and meditating. But they can also have illnesses that are very difficult to diagnose, if they can be diagnosed at all, They can have a tendency towards psychosomatic illnesses. And Barbra Streisand has struggled with endometriosis, same, which is not only a difficult to diagnose ailment, especially back then. I had a hell of a time getting a diagnosis even in 2024, but also very psychosomatic. Like stress and having a messed up nervous system will make your endo go haywire, as I learned the hard way. And that is very sixth house Neptune. And so this Mars square Neptune aspect, especially with Mars being her chart ruler, is very prominent in her chart and in her life. And this can be someone who feels like their motivation is influenced by their dreams and ideals. So if they align their actions and behaviors with their dreams and ideals, they have like a much easier time accomplishing things. But if their actions, like if you are in a job that doesn't align with your sense of purpose and what you want to do in this life, like you will have absolutely no desire to do that job. And this is me literally in this moment realizing I have that exact same placement in my chart, and that explains a lot about why I never enjoyed my corporate job or had any desire to do it. Yay. This aspect can indicate difficulty with motivation and follow through. Once again, especially if you lose sight of the purpose behind your actions, or if the purpose of your actions and your ideals and values don't align. And also struggles with boundaries. Neptune has a really hard time with boundaries. Pisces is boundaryless. Neptune obscures boundaries. And so these people might struggle with taking on more than they can actually do in a healthy way, biting off more than they can chew, so to say, just because they don't want to disappoint other people, unless they work really hard on setting their own boundaries. And I'm sure Barbra Streisand could agree that she has done that before in her life. But anyway, that is what I have to say about Barbra Streisand's birth chart. I love looking at diva charts because I feel like I learned so much. I have a pretty old episode actually where I've talked about her before, and I was really new to this podcast at that point. So it might actually be fun to watch and see how much less I knew then that I know now. But I learned so much from doing the diva charts episode. I learned so much from Barbra's memoir, all 48 hours of it, and I learned so much from looking at her chart and doing this episode. And I just think it's so cool to learn through astrology. And there's my Gemini moon talking. It's just so interesting to look at these and see how spot on they are. And you know, astrology is real and it's super cool. Anyway, my name is Jessie James. I am a professional astrologer. And if you're interested in booking an astrology reading with me, you can do so directly on my booking page at calendly.com/theastrodiva. I'm also on TikTok all the time, which you can follow at the Astrology Diva. I mostly make videos about Taylor Swift these days, but I'm sure I will resume more astrology content shortly. And you can also follow me on Instagram at astrojessie_. Anyway, I love you guys so much, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.